Wow, what a credit to Kevin and Investment Forum in terms of all of you attending this. Today, we are going to talk about venture capital investing in companies which are trying to solve some of the world's greatest problems. So we are talking about healthcare, climate change, food security. We are talking about companies which are deploying tools such as quantum computing and AI to do that. So we are really talking about the frontier of investing. Today I'm joined by a panel of experts in the field, starting with Dr. Stephen Bunting, who is one of the most respected venture capital investors in Europe and UK, with about 30 years worth of experience behind his belt. Will Kirkpatrick, who is one of the experienced research analysts at Bravos. Bravos is a venture capital firm based in the UK which focuses on investing in companies which are commercializing IP emerging out of Oxford University. Jacob Goodwin, who is an investment principal at Bravos and really heads up research, an Oxford University alumnus, as is Will. And finally, Alex Peel, who graduated in Masters in AI and Robotics from Oxford University and intends to study law at Harvard in order to protect humanity against AI. So thank you everyone for flying in from UK and US. Now, let me start with Stephen. By the way, I'm allowed to have my questions written down. My memory isn't that good. Stephen, we've heard a lot about VC investing. We're talking about investing in newly founded companies, high risk, high return. Maybe you can tell us why venture capital investing has been so successful.
Thanks, Magda. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. We can start with just a little bit about the performance versus the S&P 500. S&P 500 over the last decade has done 9.9%. Venture capital in the top quartile is north of 15%, and that ranges up to 27%. So it can really outperform. Now, clearly venture capital is risky, but this is a trade secret. So it's not as risky as people think. It's a trade secret, so don't tell anybody, okay? And I think that the reason is if you stick to some basic rules, you'll do fine, and the dice is definitely tilted in your favor. If you deviate from them, you're going to get caned. And it's that the rules are simple. It doesn't matter. There are times when people are negligent on these topics. The loss rate in life science funds, which is most of my experience, is less than 15%, which is much lower than people think. Part of that is life sciences has strong IP, so even if you hit a road bump, somebody may come along and buy your company for quite a large amount of money. And believe me, we've hit road bumps. There was one occasion where one of our companies was on our books for $2.20, and somebody came to buy the company, and they said they wanted to pay $22.20 or thereabouts. I've forgotten the exact price. Now, I'm very glad they didn't look at our accounts, because that would have been a bit of a disaster. But the point is there was value, and actually in that situation, it had taken a very long time, but actually they got good data, and in the end they were acquired for a good sum. So I think that, let's go to the basic rules, though, and the first is strong science, and I mean really elite science, people that are revered all over the world. Now, there are lots of ways of doing that, but Bravos and Oxford Science Enterprise have found quite a nifty way of doing it, which is to go to the #1 university in the world, which is some feat actually to do that. So go to the #1 university in the world. That's a bit of a self-selecting process in terms of going to good science. I think that OSE has also got unique access. They have first rights to all intellectual property that comes out of Oxford University. Now, how valuable is that? I mean, would you invest in it at a pre-money of $1 billion? It must have phenomenal value. And OSE has that access, and I think that is a huge selling point for the opportunity. The other thing that OSE has done is actually spun out over 100 companies in 8 years. I mean, that is absolutely incredible. I don't think any other university in the world has achieved that. So that's one way of getting at good science, but good science is generally what you want to go for. I think that if you have a good scientist, that will attract other good scientific people. So good science, good management, and good investor syndicate. And I'd add one other thing, and that is I would add location as critical issues. Now, I need to probably elaborate on that, but...
Absolutely. Stephen, you kind of threw some numbers around. I mean, you threw experience around. You threw 27% potentially and up returns around. So maybe quickly, give us a couple of most successful investments you've been involved in. Very quickly, you've got about a minute.
Okay. So one company which is a classic venture capital company, it started really with a focus group that I set up in Cambridge, and I wanted to identify the best young chemists in the UK. And we met about 10. They were invited to one of the colleges at Oxford. We had a meeting room there and spent the day together. And these days, I would have probably been shot for mentioning that I wanted people that were between 30 and 40 years old. But that's what we wanted. We wanted people in their peak of their scientific creativity. A year later, Shankar Balasubramanian calls me and says he's got an idea for DNA sequencing, which is 1,000 times faster than what they do today at Applied Biosystems. It took us quite a long time to work through these numbers, but it was possible. We established that, and we invested in them after a year. Even after 6 years, that was a terrifying investment. The number of problems that we had to solve, it was the most incredibly creative project. After 10 years, we'd only sold, we hadn't even been paid for our first machine when Illumina came along and bought us for $600 million, and that was in Illumina stock. But Illumina stock went up 20-fold after that. So remember, when you're selling, if it's a good deal and it's a good company, don't do cash, do stock. Okay, so it was a phenomenal success and accounts for 70% of the DNA sequencing today. And where would we be if that sequencing wasn't around during the COVID era? The second company was Gilead Sciences. We started looking at that one, and really, I was never totally convinced of the technology as a way of developing drugs. That proved to be correct, but what they did was they changed the management and the strategy, and it became the biggest antiviral company in the world. And at one point, it was worth $200 billion. And now that took 15 years, but we had already distributed and sold our shares to our investors, so we didn't get the uplift. But that's an example of something which really has changed the world in a big way. They had a lot in HIV and also eliminated hepatitis C. The third company was a company called IFN Therapeutics. Now that company was in the immuno-oncology field, and it was a very hot field at the time. And it had a founder, Gary Glick, who was pretty out of the ordinary. Within less than 12 months, he managed to get an offer to buy the company for $2.3 billion Although, to be clear, only 300 million was up front. But believe you me, we had not thought that was going to happen when we put forward the investment proposal at my company, at our partnership. So I think that not only that, he also sold another company, another part of his company. He didn't give them the whole company for $2.3 billion. No, no, no. He wasn't going to do that. He then sold another part of it for $1.5 billion to Novartis. So how did he do that? Well, a lot of these founders are very difficult people, and he had an ability to make totally unreasonable requests, but keep a straight face. And that's how he did it. But I think I'll stop there, Magda.
Thank you, Stephen. Jacob, the funds you manage, the companies you research, invest in deep tech, in healthcare, AI, climate change, opportunities that arise. But just from a personal perspective, what part of venture capital investing do you find most exciting?
Well, I want to thank the organizers for a brilliant introductory video, which has given you a lot of context on the history of technological innovation, which is obviously what we're investing in. I think most importantly, that video is not going to show anything that we're most excited about because it's in the future. A lot of people are talking about AI, and AI is, at least in the form of OpenAI and ChatGPT, which I'm sure many of you have used, is still the last. It's a late internet software company, and we talked about. You see the personal computer on this video. Many of the companies that people have been investing in over the past 2 or 3 decades in venture capital have been internet software companies. I think what Stephen's career in biotech is a sort of important parallel track, but a very important part of the ecosystem. But for the headline winners in venture capital, most of the attention has been on software. But I think now we're at a really interesting moment where attention is moving from the world of bits to the world of atoms. This is a distinction drawn by Peter Thiel between these kind of software businesses where we've seen so much progress as the internet has spread across the globe and into all sorts of different devices. We haven't seen as much progress in the physical world, in the world of atoms, and I think it's those areas, energy, climate tech, life sciences, robotics, agriculture, that we're going to see, that I'm most excited about. And I think AI is actually amplificatory to all of these areas. So, for me personally, an area that I've been very interested in my whole career is the intersection of machine learning, now we call it AI, and biology. And we have a number of companies applying artificial intelligence to these physical world problems in biology.
We always know, or we do know, that venture capital investing is a long-term game. This is not about the short-term gains of a year or 2 years. We are talking about investing with a long-term time horizon. So yes, 27 plus per annum returns, but over the long term. In the last couple of years, because of the short-termism, venture capital has gone through a bit of a rough patch, 2021, 2022, 23. What do you think is different about venture capital investing in 2024?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we've the last 2 years since the dramatic rate hikes, early 2022, I've seen a huge slowdown in venture capital after a real, quite crazy boom time in the years before then. I think where we are now is in a much healthier place. Valuations have reset. The entrepreneurs are prepared to move forward with transactions at more reasonable levels. And as I think it's, we talk about interest rates. I think that's probably not so relevant for this asset class, given the long-term nature. I think what you're really trying to do is invest in the best entrepreneurs, the best people, and the best ideas. I think what's most different about venture capital today is, to my previous answer, the nature of what is interesting to invest in has dramatically changed. I think these software businesses that have dominated over the last few decades that kind of business model is massively disrupted by AI, and the real opportunity is in these deep tech opportunities in these areas that I've discussed.
Great. We'll talk about AI just now, but Will, let's talk about clean energy, which for obvious reasons is very relevant to South Africa. I think we all know that we are going to cross that threshold of 2 degrees Celsius by 2030, which will create, and it's estimated, around 1.2 billion climate refugees from Africa heading north. And, United States thinks they've got illegal immigrant problem as it stands. There's a lot of talk in South Africa about renewables, for obvious reasons. But, Will, is that enough to solve global problems, or do we need more innovation?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think talk is enough, and we saw that with COP, the UN climate conference, a few months ago. The international community came together and still could not make any concrete plans on what to do, only high-level headlines around the need to transition away from fossil fuels. Technology innovation is the only solution to our climate crisis, and this isn't me, this is Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. We need to innovate to lower the cost of clean energy below fossil fuels, to make better energy storage. We're in South Africa. I think you know that getting solar power isn't the problem, it's storing it. And we need better baseload energy, so 24/7 reliable power so we can shift away from coal. And in terms of where we're heading, I think you're exactly right. Bill Gates, I think late last year in an interview said, we're not just passing 1.5 degrees, we're going to pass 2 degrees. And we're going to move into an era of climate mitigation rather than climate change prevention. And so we're going to need to develop technologies to adapt to our climate that is changing and will change further.
I'll come back to that in a second, but let's go to AI, because I know that everyone is massively interested in what is happening in that field. And Alex, there's a lot of hype around AI, but what are the limitations and risks of the current version of AI that we are seeing?
That's a very good question, and it begins with an understanding of what we even mean when we say AI. I think in the public conversation, when people say AI, they mean one of two things: large language models or generative AI, because these are flashy and they're the ones that have seen this massive explosion in commercialization in the past couple of years. The problem with large language models is everything that it's providing to you, every response you get from ChatGPT is a probability model. After looking at a huge volume of data, it has learned what the next most likely word is to create the most likely sentence to be the response to whatever you asked it in the first place. It's clear that that probability model has these emergent properties that allow it such incredible ability to learn tasks it was never trained on. But the other half of that problem is that it's not actually thinking. If based on what it's been trained on, it lacks judgment. It has no ability like even a middle school would have to say, I don't know, in response to a question. It's much more likely to provide an answer, even if it's fake information, just because that's what the probable answer to a question is, information, and not the lack of it. For generative AI, I think the biggest issue there is not even necessarily in the software. It's in the legal environment in which producing images and producing videos from a training set and emulating that training set presents. IP law is slow to move. Business interests are in the billions of dollars and are entrenched. In creative industries like Hollywood have some of the strongest union labor protections against AI yet in existence after last year. which makes the business prospects of generative AI a lot trickier than I think a lot of the hype would have you believe.
I'm glad you're kind of mentioning the entertainment industry because a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to brag to all the ladies in the room, I was in Miami speaking at a conference and I got to meet Rob Lowe. Now, most of you might not remember Rob Lowe, but I'm quite sure every lady in the room does. I had a poster of him when I was 15 on my wall. And he's still looking as good as he did then, in fact, better. But he was talking about the use of AI in entertainment industry, where AI is now used to create special effects. So, no longer do you need to sit in a makeup room in order to create claws for a particular, futuristic movie. He was talking about AI being used for stage design, so green rooms and very realistic stage behind them. He was talking about the use of AI in lip syncing when actors speak in multiple languages. Alex, just very quickly, what is the most exciting application of AI that you have seen recently?
So this one is going to be unexpected for a non-technical audience, and that's general purpose robotics. What a lot of people, when they think about the issues that go into creating a robot that might be able to cook you a meal, fold your laundry, they think it is fundamentally a hardware problem. But the thing is, for the most part, we've seen incredible explosion the past decade in that space. Robots can do what you program them to do with incredible accuracy now. The real issue is a software problem, and that involves taking tasks that seem simple to us, but are actually a collection of micro-tasks, any which of one a robotic body could do, but they don't know how to do them and in what order to do them. And that's how large language models get involved. A large language model can take a task like frying an egg and break that down into a series of tasks that it has been trained to know that a robot can do. Crack the egg, move the egg from place A to place B, turn the heat to whatever temperature, move here, move there. So what's really likely to unlock that sci-fi dream of your robot butler is large language models. And I don't think outside of the scientists who are working on research papers in that field, there's been anywhere near enough talking about that.
So I think everyone is interested in AI because I'm quite sure that you're facing questions from clients about how do we access AI investments, given that so much of the innovation is happening in the private space. But is that really true? We know about NVIDIA, which is the chip manufacturing company, and if you can believe it, within a very short period of time, it has now surpassed $2.2 trillion valuation. I wish I had an investor in that a while back. But in terms of access to AI investing, what else can we invest in South Africa? What can we advise clients, I do the same, about AI investing? Because I truly believe that is the future, despite the fact of the valuations that we have seen from the tech giants at the moment.
Yeah. So the fundamental insight that led to this boom in AI technology in the first place is that with extraordinary levels of data and extraordinary computing power, these emergent properties come out, the quality skyrockets. That is very expensive. As a result, as much as you have all these startup names out there in the world, OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral, they are all being bankrolled by big tech. I think that is the fundamental truth, that if you're looking at AI software right now, big tech isn't late to the game, it has already captured it. Microsoft being by far the biggest name, and for good reason, Microsoft has rights to 49% of all profit that OpenAI makes. On top of that, very recently, they have also invested in OpenAI's biggest European rival, Mistral, which, regardless of what happens with the European AI Act passing and coming into effect, means that they are the best positioned company both inside and outside of Europe, and if you've got any access to investing in them in either Europe or in American markets, they are kind of in a can't-lose situation. But the other tech giants aren't far behind. Amazon is massively invested in OpenAI's biggest competitor, Anthropic. And with their recent release of Claude 3, they're in a very good position to properly threaten OpenAI's dominance in the space. Google and Meta obviously have their issues. I think they've been well publicized, but you cannot forget they have some of the biggest R&D spend in their internal labs in AI. And in fact, this entire AI revolution is based off of a paper that came out of Google, the transformer architecture. So to write Google out just because they've been having problems in the past few months in commercializing this technology, I think is a massive mistake. And then, on top of that, Apple, as much as they've been completely absent from the conversation so far, is very much moving into the generative AI game later this year. They've freed up a lot of R&D spend with the closing of their electric vehicle project. They've been working on it a few years, and it's really just because Apple has this internal culture of we only announce stuff when we're literally entering the market, that the public consciousness about Apple's positioning is not quite there. But even Apple is going to be a player in this game in the near future. So short answer to your question is big tech remains the way to go.
Okay, so we're really talking about FANG funds, where we have seen, kind of 100% returns over the last year. But let's turn around, Will, to you again. Healthcare, huge topic in South Africa at the moment. We are trying to make healthcare, rightly or wrongly, available to everyone. I'm quite sure that I don't need to talk to you about NHI and what threat that presents. But again, healthcare. It costs about 4 billion rand to develop a new drug. So, Will, apart from this huge cost, what are the current problems of healthcare provision as you see it?
Well, look, again, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Healthcare research is expensive, and it does cost a huge amount of money to develop drugs, especially next-gen drugs like gene therapies. I think it's risen to about $5 billion US now. And the problem is pharma companies, they need to make that investment, they need to recoup their money, and they do this by charging high prices. Hemogenics, this is a hemophilia drug, it costs $4.5 million per dose. And the only patients or insurers that can afford this are often in America or the global West. And so there's a fundamental problem of access for the global markets to these drugs, which is kind of ironic given that Africa and Asia are often where they're manufactured. Another big issue is diagnostics. Often people are living far away from healthcare facilities where you have these central labs with expensive blood testing. If you're worried about whether you're getting a heartburn or heart attack, often people don't travel for hours to these hospitals and have to wait for hours for the blood to go and get tested and come back. And all too often, people do pass away during the night because of this. There's a company, you might have seen it up on the screen, that I'm so excited about. It's called Osler Diagnostics. It's developed this machine that's basically the size of a small box, which is portable, so it can be in your GP or even in your home. It's low cost, and it can diagnose diseases within 10 to 15 minutes. And why is this exciting to me? It's not just because suddenly you're democratizing diagnostics and you can save lives, but I think it can actually change the way healthcare is carried out. We love this saying that prevention is better than a cure. And the only way you can prevent disease is by understanding your own body. And to do that, you really need low-cost, accessible diagnostics. And I think this is what Osler provides. I think we're going to move into an era where we are continually diagnosing our bodies, and we can treat ourselves before things start to go seriously wrong?
Well, I think currently around 50% of global population does not have any access to diagnostics.
Yeah.
Talk to me very quickly about the usage of AI as the latest tool in healthcare provision.
Look, I think there's two different really exciting ways that AI can be used as a tool in healthcare. One, I mentioned the problem of the high cost of developing drugs, limiting access to these drugs. We're invested in a company called Charm Therapeutics, which uses AI to simulate how drugs interact with the human body. And why is this exciting? Well, you can develop drugs faster, but also cheaper, because you don't need to do these expensive lab experiments, and you can replace them with AI simulations. On the flip side to that, you do have companies like Ultromics, which is doing AI analysis of echocardiograms. So you don't need to rely on doctors to spend time poring over these echocardiograms and maybe have an 80% positive hit rate. You can get 90%, 95% plus hit rates using AI now. So I think both for diagnostics and for drug development, it's powerful tools.
So again, AI is really the thing, or so it appears. But Jacob, people misunderstand, and I have seen it, the returns and the profile of returns from venture capital investing. So everyone here, if you look at equity markets, you are kind of used to this kind of volatility, yes, but you're used to fairly simple and short, hopefully upward returns with some dips, which are understandable. But that's not the pattern of venture capital returns. Venture capital, as I mentioned, long-term investments. What is the kind of people get impatient? What can one expect in terms of the profile of returns from venture capital funds?
Yeah, that's a really important question. We're in private markets, so there is no mark-to-market, and the only moment that you get a mark is when there's a new financing round in the company, and the new investor comes in and says, "I think this company is worth twice as much as it was worth 18 months ago," and so there are time periods where the valuations in a portfolio stay flat, and that can be, in recent years, as I was saying earlier, the market has slowed down significantly. There have been long periods between financings, and so nothing seems to be happening. But obviously, the companies are making huge progress technically and in commercializing the products behind the scenes. But that's not mark to market until you get a new financing event. So if you look at a portfolio, it'll go like this, and then it will go like this. And Mags, I think you've called this like a staircase of returns. And then obviously, but I think most importantly, when you're thinking about returns, exceptional people produce exceptional outcomes. You've got to be in the best companies. And when we invest as investors, you've got to think at the early stage that this company could be worth 100 times what I'm paying for it. A small number of companies in a portfolio will drive the outperformance. So at an individual level in a portfolio, some of those returns, you can't really get those in the public markets.
Okay, within OSC, I think we've seen kind of 4 or 5 events when exactly that has happened. And some of these valuations relative to the length of the company's lifetime were absolutely ridiculous. I mean, give me a couple of those examples.
Well, I think the most vivid example of this was a company called Base Genomics, which, to Stephen's early point about Solexa and Illumina, is in the gene sequencing space. This was a company that was developed by an entrepreneur in residence at OSE who identified a big gap in the liquid biopsy market. This is a kind of diagnostic test for cancer. He found a piece of IP that was important for the next generation of these tests. a piece of IP that was going to be licensed for a very small amount of money and realized that this could be the core of a really valuable company. So he built a company around this. OSC financed the company, put a few $1 million into the company. 2 months later, the company was sold to Exact Sciences for $415 million. I think on an IRR basis, it's kind of off the charts, and that kind of thing does happen in venture, as well as these longer term large outcomes.
Still, I'm seeing a couple of questions on the screen. Just, really one sentence. Given all of your experience, sorry, this is a little bit of a plug for Bravos, but given all of your experience, what has attracted you to work with the Bravos team as a venture capital firm?
Well, I'm going to be really careful what I say here. I think, the first thing, I'm a scientist, and I love science, and I love the application of science to commercial objectives. The Oxford focus, obviously, as I said before, access to elite science and all the spin-outs. I think this is also going to be an area, early stage investment, and I mean really early, seed and first round. There's going to be huge demand for those kind of projects going forward, with the whole advent of AI and its applications in all sorts of different areas, which we haven't really even begun to think about yet. So that's very important. I think also the partners are dynamic and entrepreneurial. That was appealing, and there's a super bright young team here, where I think I can sort of help and make a difference. But what they don't know, and I would never tell them this, but I'm learning stuff from them too. So I think the other comment is it's quite nice to be able to absorb a little bit about areas outside of my expertise, like artificial intelligence, IT, some of the projects that they're doing which are not in the biotech field. And the whole space in AI reminds me of something that captured my imagination some time back. In 1997, IBM had been working for something like 30 years on this and came up with a software package which took on Kasparov, the great chess player. And it actually took 30 years before they could beat Kasparov. Now, Kasparov must have been a hell of a bright guy when you think about having probably dozens of sort of high-powered dweebs hammering away on artificial intelligence, and then it takes them 30 years. Well, with machine learning, which means teaching itself with no human input whatsoever, they managed to beat the IBM software package at chess. And do you know how long that took? It took 4 hours. So 4 hours versus 3 decades. If you just start to reflect on that for a while, we're going to see huge change happening. The issue is we haven't had time to think about exactly what we want to do with it, but there's going to be a massive change. And those changes and the new developments are going to be very exciting, and they're applied to all the areas where we're focusing on as a firm.
Okay, Stephen, let me just stop you right there because we're running out of time. But there's an interesting question, which I'm just going to rephrase a little bit, and that is, the kind of investors who want and have access to venture capital investments are usually large funds, VC funds, but there's also this concept of crowdfunding, which is kind of gaining appeal and makes venture capital investing or investing into private companies more accessible to retail investors. Who wants to comment? Will, let's go to you.
Yeah, look, I think crowdfunding is an important part of the VC life cycle, but it's a very early stage part of VC investing, and often more consumer-oriented for consumer-facing companies. I think, as Jacob said, we believe the biggest returns over the next 2 decades will come from things that are being built, hardware that can actually challenge and change and combat all of these challenges that the world is facing, like climate, like healthcare, like AI, like compute for AI. And that requires a significant amount of technical knowledge, I think, for that to make good investments in this space. So I think crowdfunding, whilst important, I think is less accessible in terms of the areas we're looking at.
I think we are out of time, and Kevin will kill me for that. But I think, in summary, there are investment vehicles, and we're happy and certainly happy to talk to you about funds which are accessible, diversified funds, which make venture capital type firms accessible, and again, on a diversified basis. Now, let me leave it at that. I want to thank the panel for being here. I want to thank all of you for listening to us, and hopefully you have learned a little bit about venture capital investing, and I hope that that has made you a little bit more, or largely more, excited about VC. So thank you very much.